Hello everybody, it is the last episode of Ansible 101, episode 15, and you may notice I got a little bit of a haircut. My wife gave me her second haircut ever, and it turned out pretty good, I think, at least. It's not all shaggy and stuff, so it's a little bit easier to deal with now. For today's live stream, I have it's set up a bit differently in OBS. So you'll have to pardon me as I'm trying to rearrange all of the different windows on my computer right now, which are a bit of a mess, just to try to make sure that I don't miss anything. I wanted to get right into it because today I want to go over some of the things that we talked about and some of the things that happened with the streaming series and get to the questions and answers, of course. That's probably the most important thing. And then talk about what's next as well, because I know some people are interested in learning some other things that I might be able to teach, and I'm excited to talk about some of those things. So let me pop over to my screen share, and I'll give you a quick look at the agenda for today. First of all, thank you so much to everybody who's sponsoring me on GitHub and on Patreon. Without your support, I would not be able to do this and devote much time to it, but because there is some financial incentive, I'm able to do that a little bit more and not feel like I'm kind of taking away from the ability to support my family. So thank you especially to some of the new supporters this week. Jay Volk, there's a private sponsor, Bryant Biggs, Dumser, Rodrigo Mutino, I guess, Jairo or Gyro Vasquez, Jairo probably, and Tycho that is an interesting name. I don't know if that was like a first last thing got mixed up or something, but anyway, thank you very much to everybody who's supporting me and making this all possible. One thing that I wanted to let you know, because this is probably the number one complaint of the printed Ansible for DevOps book, is there's no index. So when you want to find a certain topic and discover it, it's not super easy to find it. For the video series, at least, it's not like an exact index. It doesn't have every term in it. But I've been updating this page since I published it. Before the first episode went live on March 22, I posted this first blog post, and it has every video embedded. But I also went back, and I hope that you appreciate the amount of time it takes to do this. I went through each video and timestamped every single section of every video. So if you want to find out where do I mention tags, you can search on this page for tags, and here's a section, 21 minutes, 33 seconds, I can't talk, talks about conditionals and tags in playbooks, and that's in episode 6. So if you click on any of these, like if I click on this one, and apparently I have broken links, so I'll fix that, don't worry. Apparently I have the QA testing on this was not that great, but soon when you click on these timestamps, they will take you to the video on YouTube with the proper time in it, and I'll have to go back and fix those. But anyways, every video as well, if you go to the video on YouTube, and if you want to go through the whole series this way, I don't need this ad. The video itself has the table of contents in it, and, well, I do need to watch the ad to get to it. Every video has these section markers in them, so you can see where you are in the video, where you left off, and come back. YouTube's not the best platform in the world for a learning series like this, but I think that this chapter marker feature gives it a lot more capability than it had before. So hopefully you enjoy that and can go back and reference things in here. And obviously, let me move my phone out of the way here. Obviously, you can look at my book, Ansible for DevOps, which has all the same information plus a ton more in it. And I'm working on version 1.24, the 24th revision to the book, which should be done in a week or two, maybe. I'll talk more about that at the end of this thing. Anyways, so there's that. You can go back and go to this blog post. It's linked here, and just search for Ansible 101 and you'll get there somehow. The next thing is I also posted to my blog an Ansible retrospective, and this has some stats and information about the series as it has gone so far. Obviously there's this episode today, so it's not a complete retrospective, but it's pretty close. But I did have some things to share. I have some slides for a little quick presentation, just to run through some of the things that we've done and some of the cool stuff that's happened. First of all, the views per episode, it's obvious that I think YouTube's algorithm recommends that first video for a lot of people, and then there's a lot of casual viewers who are like, oh, we're actually trying to learn Ansible. I don't want to do that. They just wanted to get a quick introduction to it or something. So a lot of people fall off after that, but there is, each of the episodes has been viewed a few thousand times at least, and over time I hope that this is a good resource and people can view them over time. But it was just interesting to see that, how much the first episode is recommended and how few people kind of turn over into the second, third, fourth episodes. But the fourth episode, which was, I think, Intro to Playbooks, was also pretty popular. I'm guessing a lot of people getting into Ansible really like to see that, figure out playbooks. This was another cool thing that I did. I'll talk about it in a minute. I downloaded all the chat messages from all the episodes and analyzed them and did a little bit of fun analysis. And it was really cool to see in live chat how many different things people talked about. And a lot of times when I gave, not incomplete, but I gave information that could lead to, like, here's something else you need to know, but I didn't have time to cover all those things. A lot of times live chat covered that. And also there were a couple times when I had an example on the screen and somebody in live chat actually expanded that example. Thanks very much, Raghavender, for that kind donation. In the live chat. There were a few times when this happened, and I actually have incorporated these things from the live chat into my book, and now in the next version of the book, you'll see that the example that has the SSH changes in the security chapter actually validate those changes now. So it's really cool because not only have people are like, oh, thank you for doing these live streams, I also thank you for being in the live chat and making it even better, because that's kind of how open source works. Somebody puts out an idea or puts out some software, someone else improves on it. It's kind of like patching it. So it's kind of like live patching my book through this series. And so it's really encouraged me to want to do this some more. There was another fun highlight for the past few years using Molecule. I've always used a little Docker script that I put in my bash aliases. Now it's ZSH because I'm on Mac and I just switched to ZSH. Anyway, I've used this little alias that I hacked together, but it's actually a feature of Molecule login. So as you can see, everybody was clapping for Mike Sawyers when he suggested that. I'm sure some other people knew about it in the live chat, but it's things like that that really, I think, have improved this series. And that's why in the first few in a few episodes, I trimmed them so that you didn't see that first little lead in that says live chats or the stream starting soon. But as time went on, I didn't cut that out, because when I trim the video after the fact, YouTube removes the live chat, and I think the live chat adds a lot to the reviewing of the videos, because you see people's thoughts as they go along. So what you say in that live chat right now, which I'll pop on well, you can't see my screen, so you can't see it. Anyway, what you say in the live chat will live forever, or at least as long as YouTube preserves live chat history. Also, another cool thing that I saw, I was never expecting this. I thought I'm an American English-speaking person who can speak English and read and write Latin. So I'm not very multilingual, and I probably don't have that much appeal outside of the US, maybe UK, and some other countries that have a lot of English speakers. But we had representation from over 56 countries. So this was just in live chats, the countries that were mentioned in live chats. And obviously there was the most in the USA, probably because I'm based there and I speak English and all that. But we had a ton of representation from all over the world, even some countries and places that I never even had thought of, like, oh, there's people that use Ansible here. But it speaks to Ansible's broad appeal and the fact that all over the world, everyone who is using technology needs to automate things and make it better. Some of the other stats there is the top countries were USA, India, UK, Netherlands, Germany, and France. And I'm very happy that Netherlands was up there, because as you have seen from my previous episodes, I have a lot of Dutch heritage and sometimes wear my Dutch shirts. It was also neat. Like I said, in Africa, I didn't realize there are some pretty big communities in some of the countries. Like I saw Kenya, Angola, Namibia, Ghana, Egypt, and South Africa. In Europe, almost every country was represented. in Asia. There were some more countries. Like I would have thought that some of the countries were, at least for a lot of the tech stuff that I follow, the tech world in some Asian countries seems to be a lot different than especially the US English speaking world, but there's a lot of overlap there too that I didn't even notice. And of course, we have some Australian and New Zealand friends. And in the Americas too, I was surprised I saw somebody from the Dominican Republic. I've tried so much to meet people from especially Central America, but some of the South American countries. And I know some people in Brazil and a few in Argentina. But through the live chat, I also noticed that there were some people from Uruguay and a few other places too that I have never been able to meet. So as I've said before, if you would in live chat, just post where you're from. It's always fun to see around the world where people are. And I also I'm glad to see people coming from South America, but I'm also sad because you guys always kind of pummel our North American U.S. Men's soccer team. If you want to take it easy on them one of these times, that'd be great so we could have a chance. But anyways, the other chart that I do have is in the US alone, 25 states were represented. And again, I'm a little disappointed because I didn't get anybody from Hawaii. Maybe we can get somebody from Hawaii for the next one, but I wonder if there's just not that many sysadmins who are living the dream on the shores of Hawaii, and it's not a very IT-focused state, but we'll see. Let's see. What else do we have? So one thing I wanted to mention was when I was building these stats, I was like, I need a way to download the live chat. And I didn't want to just like play the video back and keep copying and pasting because that little live chat box on YouTube doesn't show things that nicely for copying and pasting purposes. So I found this thing called YouTube Chat Crawler. I think it was from somebody from Korea had written a blog post with a Python script. Someone else from Korea had taken that Python script, put in a GitHub repo, and it almost worked, but I was getting some errors. So I forked that repo and made a few changes. I didn't have time to send up a PR or anything like that because I was trying to get this done for this live stream. But I do have a link to it. You can just search for YouTube_chat_crawler and find it if you ever need to do that. It's a very specialized thing because very few people, I think, save YouTube live chats, but it was just a neat thing that I saw. It's the power of open source, and one reason why I do it is it's quick. You can quickly do almost anything you ever want to do based on other people's work, and it really, by open sourcing that work, you can help other people accelerate their own journey in learning in IT and automation and software. What else do I have? Another interesting thing was one reason I did this live streaming series on YouTube was I have a YouTube channel that at the beginning of it had, I think, 3,000 subscribers. I've been on YouTube since 2006. I actually started out doing some videos on Google. I think it was called Google Video at the time. But of course, then Google bought YouTube, so Google Video went away, and all the videos I had on Google Video just kind of vanished. So anyway, I've been on YouTube forever, and I've posted a lot of random videos. You can go back and look at my channel and see some of those crazy things. Thanks a lot, Phil, for the videos. And yes, I will be continuing on some other things. I'll get to that later. Anyway, so the thing is that you can monetize a YouTube channel and start making some money. And people are always like, oh, this could be a career. And you see all these people who are vlogging and stuff, and they have hundreds of thousands of followers. And from what I've found, it's not the most profitable venture in the world. So these particular episodes and the things that I'm doing with these live streams are more, they're not like one and done, like you watch it and then it's over and nobody goes back and watches it. I try to make it rewatchable, especially with the chapter markers and things. So when you take all the earnings on YouTube that I've made from this and you take the amount of time, and this is probably a little bit of an underestimate, some episodes I've spent a few more hours preparing for them. And of course I wrote a whole book, and I'm using that book's example, so I'm not counting any of those hours because that was part of the book writing process. But in the end, would you do this kind of work for $5.81 an hour when there are plenty of jobs out there for DevOps and automation and Ansible that pay probably a little bit more than $5 an hour? Probably not, but that's why I'm trying to make this more sustainable with donations on GitHub and Patreon, and also trying to explore other ways to get either sponsorship or other things like that. So please, if you feel inclined and want to support work like this, go ahead and pop over to my GitHub and Patreon pages. GitHub is preferred just because it's a little bit of an easier platform to work with, and B, right now GitHub's doing a match program that Patreon is not doing, and I think their fees, I don't know if they have no fees or their fees are smaller or something, but it's also, I like it more because GitHub is where I do all my open source work, so it's kind of cool to have all the sponsorship stuff through there. But I'm trying to get that to be a sustainable thing. You might notice if you go to my GitHub page, it shows the amount of money that I'm getting, because I'm trying to be open with, like in all things, I'm trying to be open with what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and hopefully I can help someone else too. I know a couple people, after seeing my Drupal streams and these streams, they've tried to kind of start doing their own streaming thing. So that's cool. I love trying to help other people kind of level up, and ideally the people who come after me will do better than me, because that will make our world a better place. So anyway, that was my little retrospective spiel, talking about all the different things that have happened in this live streaming series. I hope you've gotten something out of it. I know I have. Like I mentioned, I've learned a couple things about Ansible in the live chat. So thanks for watching, and let's get into the Q&As. I got a good number of questions and answers. Well, I didn't get answers. I got a good number of questions, and some of them, a few of them were a little bit too complex to deal with in a live stream. It was more like, here's my problem that I've been working on for 6 weeks. Can you solve it in 10 minutes? Probably not. So there's a couple I had to exclude for that. There were a couple too that were a bit ambiguous, and I just didn't have enough information, and just for time constraints, I decided to leave a couple off. But hopefully we'll be able to get through. I have 45 minutes, and if necessary, I could go over a few minutes, I guess. But hopefully we can get through most, if not all, of these. So the first one is from Matthias. Matthias, I'm terrible with names. I have to say that up front. So hopefully that's how you say your name. And if I do mention one of your questions, go ahead and give me a wave on the live chat so I can say hi to you as well. The question is, how do you organize your Ansible tasks? What are the best practices for Ansible? So this is a little bit of a cop-out answer, but in Ansible for DevOps, there's an appendix, and I don't know why I'm putting my book down under my phone, because I have to keep moving it. In the back, Appendix 2, I believe it is, which I have been rewriting. No, not Appendix 2. Appendix B is called Ansible Best Practices and Conventions. You can't probably see that because it's teeny tiny. But anyways, the book is available. There's a link to it in the description below. That has kind of what I consider the best practices. Organizing tasks, I would look back into episodes 3 to 6 of this Ansible 101 series, and those talk about playbook organization, playbook roles, includes, things like that. And my general rule of thumb is that if I have a task file that gets over 100 lines long, I'll start thinking about how to break that up. If you have usually I start writing a playbook. If the playbook gets over 100 lines, then I start thinking, like, can I put the handlers in a handlers file? Can I put the vars in a vars file? That way I can start breaking it up in a way that makes sense to me. Yeah, so that's probably about it for that. The only other thing I mentioned is that if I start seeing Python in my YAML, I start thinking about rewriting that Python as a plugin somehow, because Python and YAML is not a great idea. Or if you have like 17 chained Jinja filters, you might want to just write a plugin that does that in Python instead of having this programming language kind of mixed into your YAML. That's probably the main thing that I've seen in every Hacker News post about, oh, Ansible's terrible. It's just programming in YAML. It's like, well, that's not really what I've seen. But if you're doing it that way, it's probably not the best way. So anyways, there's also, I wanted to mention that in episode 13 of this series, there was an example of writing a test plugin, and a lot of the plugins, like filter plugins and things like that, are very similar. So look back there too, if you need to start working on extracting things into plugins. Let's see. Good. This I haven't actually tested what I'm doing in OBS, but apparently it works. So I can advance the slide without being inside of OBS. How do you bootstrap a computer with Ansible? I do it 2 ways, and this is Adam saying this. Use Kickstart to put a key and a user on the computer. or you connect to a fresh instance with root and create an Ansible user, and then kind of go from there and switch the user to the Ansible user for the next playbook run. And basically, there are a lot of different ways to do it, and I'm pretty much the same way. There are sometimes, like when I bootstrap some servers for server check-in, which is a service that I run that allows you to check server status. I guess I'll plug that really quick, server check-in. This service has been running for years, and it checks all kinds of different things, but it gives you a monthly report and stuff. I basically wrote it because I wanted something really cheap compared to Pingdom, because there were other free tools that didn't have a dedicated SMS number to text me when my server was down. And then there's Pingdom, which was a lot more expensive, so I wanted something in between, so I made server check-in, and it's been running since. Anyways, when I start the servers, to keep the service cheap, I use low-end boxes, so basically super cheap VPSs. We're talking like 10 or 20 bucks a year. Some of them are from not super trusted providers, like it might be somebody running a business that might go away in a few months. So I have to worry about the security on each server, and I don't put keys on the servers that I care about. I don't put data on the servers I care about. That's all centrally managed and more stable servers. So I do the same thing that, who was this, Adam? The same thing that Adam does, and I have it like the VM system builds the server, and it has a root user with a password. So I have an Ansible playbook that the first run, it uses the root user, and then after that, it uses an Ansible user that the root user runs set up for it. And I have a kind of an initialization play that does that, and the next run, it doesn't run that play. So that's one way to do it. The other way that I do a lot is I use Packer, and I build images, AMIs in Amazon or images elsewhere. And let me make sure that you can actually see this. You can't, good. So I have this repository Packer boxes. This is some examples. These are building VirtualBox images, but it's the same kind of principle for building anything else. These use Ansible, but they also use a kickstart file. The kickstart file creates the user account, and then Ansible connects using Packer into the box and then builds all the things inside of it. And then Packer packages up the box, and then I can push it up to the cloud, and then I can build servers off that box. So those are the two ways that I typically see people do it. I don't think you're doing anything wrong. I think you're doing what I would do. And it's funny, I noticed I'm trying to move my mouse out of here and it's stuck in OBS, but that's because I'm seeing my screen in OBS on another screen. So my brain is getting very confused right now. All right, let's go to the next one. We have Dwayne asking, will you be creating a mastering Ansible book and doing another live stream for that? You mentioned you're working on Ansible for Kubernetes. Is it full K8s or K3s? Ansible for Kubernetes is already available. I'm writing it currently. It's kind of taken a pause for the past month or so because of Ansible 101 and some of the Raspberry Pi stuff I'm doing. But I do have another chapter almost complete, and I'm working on the next chapter after that as well. It should be finished. I was targeting by summer. Now I'm targeting, I think, by fall. But you can still buy it today, and you'll get every update, just like with Ansible for DevOps, free forever. And it targets full K8s. I'll probably have a chapter that talks a little bit about K3s and some other distributions as well, maybe OpenShift. But anyway, that is what I'm working on. That's my next major project. And I'm probably going to be doing some sort of series on YouTube around this. I don't know if it's going to be a live stream or pre-recorded videos yet. We'll see. But that's my next thing. I'm not going to do a mastering Ansible book just because I think once you get past the Ansible 101 level, you branch off into a lot of different specialties like networking or security or Windows or app deployment or things like that, where I have some expertise in some of those areas, but I don't feel like I could cover it that well in a way that the thing is, when I write about something or when I talk about something, I like to know in depth everything about it so that I can talk about it well, or at least enough that I can really teach it in a way that people can understand it. And I don't understand everything in the areas that I would want to write about if I wrote like a mastering level book. And I think sometimes when I read books at that level, it's like the advanced 200 or 300 or 400 level courses. A lot of times those books try to be general, but you can't be general when you're going that deep. And I guess for me, a lot of the times my blog posts get that deep, and but they're very hyper focused on one specific issue. All right, next up we have Joshua, who says, what's the best place for Ansible variables? Ansible.cfg, oops, this is wrong. Ansible.cfg or an inventory file? And the answer there is, it really depends. I usually have an Ansible.cfg in all my playbooks. Thank you very much, Remy. And you share a name with a package maintainer for the PHP packages on Red Hat systems. That he's a very good package maintainer, so good on you for that. Anyways, I usually have an Ansible.cfg file in every playbook. So if the variable is something I want to apply globally, I'll pop it in there. But a lot of times the variables that I want to control for different servers or groups of servers, I don't want to apply it globally. So I'll have that in my inventory. So typically, if possible, I stick things into inventory. And only if it's something I know I always want to have it set a certain way will I put it in Ansible.cfg, because Ansible.cfg is really hard to override. So I typically keep those trim. Usually those files end up having 10 or 12 settings in them. The one sad thing about Ansible.cfg is if you put one in, it overrides all configuration from any other Ansible.cfg on your system. So you can't have a global one and then override some settings. So I end up having to put no cows equals 1 in pretty much every Ansible.cfg. Otherwise, my terminal fills up with cows, which isn't the worst thing in the world. And I have here with me the little Ansible. And I do love the Ansible, and I do love cowsay, but sometimes it makes it a little bit hard to read playbook output. Let's see what else we got. Gautam says, what's the best way to run Ansible in CI/CD? Like in Docker containers? Are there any gotchas? I actually have, let me pop over here, ansible.jeffgeerling.com. I have a list on this page of all the container images and, or the container images that I maintain for Ansible testing, and for some reason these test statuses aren't loading, but most of them are passing. I use these in my CI environments for different things like testing an Ansible playbook, testing Ansible roles. I use them with Molecule, or I just use them with Docker straight up to do the testing for a lot of different projects. So if you want to see how I use it, most of my projects are open source, and you can go to like Drupal VM is one instance where it uses these images with Docker and a script that kind of puts everything together and runs it. For deployment, that's a different thing altogether. You could use one of these containers and run Ansible against another host like that, but typically for deployment, I recommend using something like Jenkins or Ansible Tower and using their environments to do the actual Ansible runs. So another cool thing that's coming soon, and you mentioned Docker in particular, I know that Ansible Tower is going to have a feature called execution environments. That's something that's been talked about for a year or so now. And that's supposed to be like a containerized way to build Ansible playbooks. So your playbook kind of has its own container image associated with it that it's used to deploy things. And that container image only has the parts of Ansible that you really need to run your playbook. So if you have a playbook that only needs Ansible's base stuff, which is in Ansible 2.10 and later, Ansible base is a lot smaller. It doesn't have all 4,000 modules. It has like 80 modules. If you only need those 80 modules, then your image that you use to run Ansible can be that much smaller. So that's a cool feature that's coming, and it'll be part of Tower, I think, in like 3.8 or 4.0, or I don't know the versioning coming up, but be on the lookout for that. But also, in any other environment, it's pretty trivial to make sure you have Python installed and then use pip to install Ansible. So I do that sometimes instead of using one of these Docker images. All right, so let's see. Dave asks, if you have a mix of CentOS, Ubuntu, and Windows servers, would you maintain separate repositories for Linux versus Windows, or one single repo? So there's a lot of different layers to that answer. I think it really comes down to the apps that you manage. So if you have one big system and one application that runs on all these different servers, you know, with different software on things. Hey, Dave, thanks for giving the wave out there, or shout out. I think if it's one big application that runs on these things, one repo would be good. But I think a lot of times what you have is you have tons of different servers. They're all running different things. They're all part of a big giant system, basically your whole company. But the one set of servers might be running Jenkins, and another set of servers might be running your web app for some warehousing system. Another set of servers is running your customer relationship management. A hospital system might have its health records on another system. In that case, I would have separate repos for each type of server or type of thing that you're running. Now, on the flip side, you still, I think, would want to manage inventory centrally, if at all possible. And there are companies that have products like Device42, SolarWinds. I think Red Hat has a system for it. I forget what it's called. But basically, they're central inventory management systems for physical servers, virtual servers, all that kind of stuff, cloud server instances. And that way, all the inventory can be central. And then the actual projects that use that inventory can pull down the parts of the inventory it needs. That's usually my recommendation there. But that's something that really is a project by project and company by company thing. I typically don't like monorepos. Some people do, some people don't. But if you notice with my Ansible roles, I have over 200 repositories on GitHub for that. And I like to have that kind of decentralized. I guess I'm more on the side of the bazaar over the cathedral in terms of open source and just general project maintenance. I find it a little bit easier that way. All right, next question is from Judd. What is your opinion on ownership of operations in Ansible for systems that rely on each other? For example, you have a Postgres database server, but it actually manages, it provides a database for different independently managed systems. For me, I think this is a good question because this is where sometimes if you do the wrong thing, you're going to find yourself having a maintenance nightmare. And also, if you work in a team-based environment, the team is, people are stepping on each other's feet sometimes. I like to make sure that software itself, like Postgres or Nginx or whatever, each one of those software things has its own Ansible role or a separate Ansible playbook that does just the configuration for that software. And then on top of that, I have specific servers that I set up. So my Postgres role, I actually use it in like 15 different places. And one of them might be a dedicated server for one application. Another one might be a server that's in a cluster that serves 5 or 6 different applications. So for each of those different applications, I have a playbook that uses that role and installs that software. But the role itself is generic enough that I can use it in all these different places because the configuration of the application or the server like Postgres is something that can be more generic and is easier to manage that way. But the actual like database users, database names, some of the configuration settings for Postgres, those can vary by application type. So it'd have a separate playbook for the cluster itself that pulls in that Postgres role. Something like that. But my way is not the only way. And there are people who have just one big playbook that does everything from installing Postgres to configuring it to configuring databases and users and the connections and all that kind of stuff, and even deploying the applications that use it. That's a valid option, but again, I'm more on the bazaar side of the cathedral versus the bazaar. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, there's a book called Cathedral and the Bazaar. It's not the best thing in the world about it, but it does do a good job of laying out the different approaches in open source versus oftentimes the proprietary way where you kind of have a cathedral that's managed like one big hole, not like a hole that like an empty space, but a WHOLE. Let's see, what else do we have here? Now I am probably going to mess up this name. Namasavayam. That might be right. So this person is a teacher who has servers that they set up inside a NAT on VMware Workstation on their laptops, I'm guessing. And then they want to check those servers using Ansible playbooks to make sure that the servers are set up correctly. But they also don't want to give the playbook to the students because the playbook could just look at the playbook and see exactly how to do everything. So could use something like SSH port forwarding to a central server that their workstation in the school network could see, something along those lines. And I said, I basically said that I'm not super familiar with VMware anymore. I used to use Fusion and Workstation a bit, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but the problem is that I kept paying the upgrade licenses, and when I use it with Vagrant, I had to buy a Vagrant plugin with it, and it just got a bit expensive for me. And I didn't really need any of the features in it. So I'm not super familiar, but I know that there's a way to set up port forwarding inside of VMware and the networking. And you should be able to get that to work on a central network. But I give a strong caveat that that can lead to security issues, especially since if it's a student who might not know what they're doing, they might have an unsecured host running on their machine that could cause issues doing that. Probably not as big an issue, but I would consult somebody with a little more VMware experience there. And also live chat. There's some other notes in there that you might want to take a look at. SSH jump hosts and reverse proxying for SSH. There are some things you could probably figure out. All right, let's move on to David. How do you deal with isolated servers in a DMC that don't have internet access? Tower has isolated nodes, but that feature is not available in AWX. We currently have a server inside the DMZ act as an orchestrator pulling playbooks from Git, and that's basically exactly what I would do. I had this situation on one system, and we just ran one server inside the DMZ, which was kind of the bastion. Did have internet access, and we could push things to it, and it would run the orchestration on those other servers. So it's hard because it's like almost any kind of thing that you want to do nowadays, somewhere you have to have a connection to the internet or some protected connection. And so that's kind of the best way to do it if you don't have a Red Hat subscription and can't use Tower for it. Let's see, Martin. Martin asks, can you talk about the tasks? Can you talk about tasks based on facts? Like if you have a couple hosts and want to deploy an app to the host with the most free RAM. Now, I have to say that I guess there be dragons here. This particular suggestion is deploying an app to the host with the most free RAM. I have a sample playbook here, and let me make sure you can see it by dragging it over around my face. And I note that I put up here, there be dragons. This is dangerous. And there is a way to do this. And I actually tested it out last night because I was like, that is an interesting problem. How could you do that with Ansible? But I'll tell you why it might not be a great idea to do that particular thing with Ansible. But the thing that you would need to do is Ansible stores facts by host. So if you wanted to just say like, delegate this task to a server that has the most memory, you can't, there's no way to do that because Ansible doesn't compare the different host facts against each other when you do that. So what you'd have to do is you'd basically have to look in all the host vars that are in Ansible's memory. And then I'm using a thing called sort by subkey. I have a link up here, Stack Overflow. There's a link in here to an answer that has a custom filter that's called sort by subkey that you could do something like that. It would need a little modification probably, but the idea is that you would get all the hosts, you would sort by how much memory is free, and then get the one with the most, which should be the last, and then you'd know the ID of the host, and then you would have to get that actual host name out of here. Well, you'd get that host out of the host vars using the ID of it here, and then you would delegate the task of deploying the app to that host. But there's a few problems here. Servers, the amount of free memory goes up and down as you do things on servers. And so the server, the first run might be a different server than the second run, especially if your app uses a lot of RAM. The second time you'd run this playbook, the host with the most would become a different server. So you'd end up deploying your app to two different servers, and that would be a big problem. So my warning here is that you probably don't want to do that. You probably want to use a system that is scheduling services on your servers more automatically and is built for that. So one example of that is Kubernetes. And Ansible can manage Kubernetes and set it up and do all that stuff, but Kubernetes is built to see, oh, this server doesn't have as much RAM, so I'm going to move stuff to it, or I'm going to move stuff off of it to a server with more RAM. Ansible is not really built to be that continuous reconciliation system in the same way that Kubernetes is. So for that particular instance, I wouldn't do that. But there are some things that you would do, like if you had to run a job in Ansible on one of your 4 web servers, you would want to make sure that the web server at least had 500 megabytes of free RAM to run this job. So you could say in a task, find any server that has more than 500 megabytes and delegate this task to that one server that has the most RAM. That would make more sense because it's an ephemeral job that's not going to be persistent, and you won't run into the problem of accidentally deploying it to every server in your fleet and breaking things. So that is my suggestion there. Let's go on to she, I guess, or I'm guessing it's she. Would you recommend installing AWX in a Kubernetes cluster? Should it be in a dedicated cluster? I would say yes and no. You can actually install Tower in OpenShift or in any Kubernetes cluster with the official Kubernetes or with the official Tower installer. And if you want to do it, that's probably the best way, especially if you have a Red Hat Tower subscription and have support for it. That's the only supported way. So that's obviously the best way to do it. But if you wanted to do it for AWX in particular, the only simple way to do it, but of course it's not supported, is to use the Tower operator that I set up. And I have a note on this in a minute. But there is an operator that runs inside of Kubernetes, and the setup is fairly simple. You just apply this operator manifest, it installs the operator inside your cluster, and then you create a Tower instance by creating this custom resource. And you would create it for AWX, and I think, yeah, so here's the difference that you'd have for AWX. This repository itself, I'm actually working with Ansible to get it moved into Ansible's namespace. And this particular version of it is going to morph into, this will be the unsupported AWX operator. And I think long-term, the idea is that the Tower operator would be the best way to get Tower running in your cluster. But it is supported. The one thing that I'll note is that Tower's architecture is currently structured a little bit more for standalone servers. It runs fine in Kubernetes, but it's not like the most cloud native setup of Tower that you could get. And I think long-term, we're going to see Tower evolve a little bit to be better in a Kubernetes and OpenShift ecosystem. So be on the lookout for that. Follow this project, and hopefully you'll see some big improvements there. All right, next up is, the other question is, should it be in a dedicated cluster? Can it be in a shared cluster? It can be in a shared cluster. I don't see any big problem with that. Use namespaces, deploy Tower into a Tower namespace or something. But if for something like Tower in particular, it's going to be creating lots of containers, pods to run the tasks that it's doing. Sometimes it's nice to run that in a dedicated cluster or on its own dedicated servers even. So that's my only caveat there. Okay, what's next? Daniel says, what are some cases you might have seen Ansible used when it shouldn't have been used? I have a couple examples, actually. This is one. This would probably be much better as a Python script or a little app, or even you could use Go or something. But one time I was trying to update all of the different requirements in my requirements.yaml file for Drupal VM, and I was like, this is taking forever because there's no way to say like Ansible Galaxy update. You can't do that with the requirements file. You have to manage it by hand. So I wrote this little utility, and I used Ansible for it, and I put in here that this is one of the gookiest Ansible playbooks I've ever written because it does a lot of weird things, and it manages YAML. And earlier how I was talking about how you should never have like a lot of Python and conditions and junk inside your YAML. Well, this playbook does a lot of that stuff. The playbook itself looks a little bit simple, but I think I masked a lot of the complexity in here. You can see I'm using shell to do a lot of gooky things, and I'm basically doing programming and looping and all kinds of crazy things inside of the YAML that is not super easy to follow. So that's one area where, as I said, you probably shouldn't be. This would probably be better as a Python tool or Go or some other thing that can more natively deal with the API calls and the structure of the YAML and all that. But the crazy thing is that you can do it in Ansible. Whether or not that's a good idea, I'll leave that up to you. I don't think it is, but it works. And I'm the kind of person that says if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, then you didn't get it done. So The other one that I have is I'm actually generating HTML with Ansible. That's probably also an area where you probably would want to use something else besides Ansible if you're generating HTML. But I had it here and I decided to use it. This is part of my ansible.jeffgeerling.com build script. But again, it works. I got it done. So there you go. Let's see. So that was Daniel's question. Simon says, I can control Linux hosts via SSH with Ansible through multiple bastion hosts. Can you give an example how I can chain SSH or configure WinRM to jump through multiple Linux bastion hosts? You're going to have to ask somebody else on that. Maybe somebody in live chat has some suggestions. I mentioned in the Windows episode, which was the last episode 14, that I am not a Windows guy. I use it a lot. I know how to manage it in general, and back in Windows NT days, I did a lot of Windows admin work, but I am not familiar with WinRM, so you'll have to find somewhere else to get that support. All right, next up we have Hans. How can you make Molecule faster for multiple host scenarios, like with Vagrant? How do you properly create and remove admin users with SSH key access? What's the best practice for running different roles on different hosts in one playbook? Let's see. So the first one, Molecule can actually test on multiple hosts in Docker, which is going to be a little bit faster than, maybe this is the wrong, yeah, this is totally not the right link. Hold on a second. I don't know why I messed up this link like that. And I just pasted it wrong again. Hold on a second. All right, I don't know why. Okay, is this gonna work? There we go. So Molecule can be used with Vagrant, of course, but with Vagrant, it's gonna take a little bit longer to bootstrap the instances, run the tests and all that. You can do the same thing with Docker. And there's this blog post which was just posted June 29. So I guess this was just posted a couple days ago. A great blog post and perfect timing because otherwise we wouldn't be able to see it. It has an example, and I'm very happy because this example uses my Docker containers. But this example shows you that you can have multiple instances inside of your Molecule configuration. And then you can add a custom inventory file. Well, actually, in Molecule, it generates its own inventory. So you have to tell it about what groups they're in. So you can add that inside of each of these different instances. And then you can give it host vars so that you can, for instance, if I was testing a MySQL cluster, I would want to have the primary MySQL instance have maybe it have one variable, and then all the slaves or the secondaries or replicas or whatever have another variable set on them. So you would set that up in here, and this is the full example. So I would investigate using that for Molecule to make it a little bit faster in testing, and it would make it possible to do this kind of testing in most CI systems as well. So that'd be kind of cool. Creating and removing admin users with SSH key access. I have an example that is not, it's not the canonical example here, but basically, I don't know why. I think I just hid Safari. There we go. Basically, this is the same kind of thing I would do if I were doing it with keys and things that were stored somewhere else. But I have a role called GitHub users that actually, you just give the role a list of, let me go to the GitHub repo. So I can, well, the README is on Galaxy too, I guess. But you give it a list of GitHub users, and you also can give a list of GitHub users absent. And this one will make sure that the user has an account on your server with that GitHub username and any of the keys attached to their GitHub account. And if it's absent, it will remove them from that server. So take a look at this role for how it works and how it does it. That's kind of how I do it. Even if I'm not using GitHub, it's the same kind of setup for managing keys and being able to remove people. Yeah, I just realized I haven't been sharing the links in. I should share these links in the live chat so that you can see that. So there's that one. Let me go back to testing Ansible roles with multiple hosts. I'll pop that in here. Sorry about that. That way you can bookmark these things. I'll probably have these available. I might do a blog post with all the links as well after the fact. But yeah, So anyway, that's that. And there was a third part to that question too. Let me get back to it. Running different roles on different hosts in one playbook. There's a good example of that. I have, if you have not seen it, I have a series that's covering Raspberry Pi clustering using the Turing Pi, which let me pause this here. So this is the Turing Pi. It is a cluster of 7 Raspberry Pi compute modules. This is a prototype board, and they actually are starting to ship in the next week or so. They got the boards in, and they're going to start shipping all the boards by sometime in August. So between now and then, if you ordered one, you'll get one. It's a pretty cool board, and I have this whole series. This is episode 3, and I'm up to episode 5 now. And it's talking about a Kubernetes cluster running on Raspberry Pis. And I don't have it up here with me, but I have another cluster of Raspberry Pi 4s, and I kind of compare the two and talk about the differences. But this playbook that I used is, it's called K3s Ansible. And let me find that, K3s Ansible. It's a playbook that's maintained by Rancher, and I'll pop it into live stream for you. And this playbook, if you can see here, well, let me actually go back to that so I can just show it to you. The playbook has, it uses Ansible plays. So this is the first play is on the entire cluster. So the group is K3s cluster, and it runs these 4 roles on the whole cluster. Then the second play only runs on the master Kubernetes node, and that runs this role. And then there's the last play just runs on all the nodes that connect to the master node, and that runs the node role. So that's typically how I do it. 2 different plays. You can also you could use delegate to. You could have one play that has multiple things, and then you could have like include role with a delegate to, and then delegate it to the hosts that are in a group. That would work too. This is a little cleaner if you can make it clean like this. If you have a lot more complexity, then I would try to clean up that complexity so you could get to this kind of point. But you can also use delegate to delegate to certain servers. Let's see. So those are those 3 questions. Let me go to the next one. Amit asks, how do we integrate CyberArk with Ansible? You'd have to ask someone at CyberArk or Red Hat about that. There's so many things, like I said earlier, and this is the reason I'm not going to do something with like mastering Ansible probably, is there are so many things that Ansible integrates with in so many different areas. And some of them, there's like so much information out there about it, but there's no way one person can know all these things. So for CyberArk and for so many other third-party utilities that integrate with Ansible, you'll have to find an expert in that to figure those kind of things out. Let's see. Claudio asks, what are best practices for organizing playbooks for dev stage prod environments and selective task execution? There's a section in episode 6, and let me go there really quick. Let's see. I pasted the link in there. Oh, I see. I'm linking to my own website for these. This should be a link to YouTube, youtube.com. Let's try that out. So I should probably fix all these links here. There's a part of episode 6 that talks about tags and blocks a tiny bit. I kind of skip over that. And I guess I'm giving Udemy a bunch of ads here by playing my videos. But anyway, there's a section in here that talks about conditionals, tags, that kind of stuff. I would say I don't use tags too much. I mostly use them when I want to have a section of a playbook that I can run independently when I need to. And as an example of that, I have my Midwestern Mac, the site, whoops, I'm in the wrong window here. The site that runs geerlingguy.com, or the server setup for that. And if I go to it, let me open up my terminal. I'm going to open up, let's see. Okay. So if I go in here, I do use tags in here. Well, that's really short. And where is it? Deploy. So I think this deploy is under a tag. Yeah, so deploy, I have a deploy tag. So that way I can just run the playbook with deploy when I don't need to manage the server at all. I just need to update the deployed applications, and it'll run this include. And we'll get back to this in a couple minutes too when we talk about something else. But that's kind of the extent that I use tags and organize things. But you'll see here I also use a block for the tasks that run after I update my Drupal code base. And that just uses a when conditional that says when the code base is updated, run these tasks. So I like to keep things simple like that. I don't typically put a lot of different things in blocks, and I often don't use like what is it, block fail always, or block retry, or block whatever the condition is. I don't often use that because I have other mechanisms usually for detecting failure, or I want to just have the whole job fail. Sometimes I have done that. Anyways, let's see. Let me get out of here and go back to my other thing. Okay, so that was Claudio's question. Robert says, for a complex playbook involving many files, how does one visualize what the playbook's going to do, especially if you didn't write it yourself? Now, good question. This is something that some people are a lot more visual than others, and some people like to get an overview of things before they see it. If you're like me, I like to look at the code, and I can, especially since I know Ansible better, but even before that, whenever I get into something, I just dig into the code and start running through it. Not everybody's brain works that way, and you like to see more of a bird's eye view of it. And Ansible actually has ways to do that. So with this Midwestern Mac playbook, Ansible has a feature called list tasks. And that's not going to run the playbook, but it's going to kind of parse the entire playbook and show you all the things that'll happen. And if you run that, it gives you all of this output, and it shows you every task that could run. Now, this is not exactly what will run, but it will give you an overview of everything that happens. So these are all the different things that happen. You can see some patterns, like it's running this firewall role, it's running the NTP role, then it runs exim and git. So it's a good quick way to get a bird's eye overview. And there's also a pretty cool thing called the Ansible Playbook Grapher, and I will put a link to it in here. Aaron asks, what's Drush? Drush is a Drupal shell. So it's just a thing that you use with Drupal to run things in your shell, automation and things like that. But this Ansible Playbook Grapher is a cool little utility that will build a visual representation of your playbook based on the hosts that things are running on and all that. And there's a blog post, again, that I found. This one was written a little bit further in the past, so somebody didn't write it just for this episode. But there's a blog post here that kind of gives you a walkthrough of how to install it, how to use it to visualize your Ansible Playbook tasks, and has an example in here as well for networking. So I thought that was pretty cool if you want to get that bird's eye view, and you can also integrate it with CI workflow if you wanted to kind of, you could even, sometimes in the web world, we have a visual diff of things, and you could have a visual diff of the output from this tool and see what changes over time in your playbook runs, and see if you're adding extra loops where you don't need them, things like that. So pretty cool stuff. For some people, like I said, that's not how I really think and learn, so it's not as beneficial to me. A lot of times someone's like, oh, have you seen this visualization tool? I'm like, yeah, but my brain just, it doesn't work that way. So if it helps you, that's awesome. You can also run a playbook in check mode, but that can be a little dangerous because sometimes check mode can still result in changes. Especially, like, I think Robert mentioned if he didn't write it himself, that's when it's more dangerous to run check mode, because I know for me, I usually test things in check mode to make sure that it's not going to blow my system up, but not everybody does that. So if you didn't write it yourself, you need to be more careful. But those are my recommendations there. Otherwise, just dive into the code. Seb asks, and I think we're getting close to time, but we'll go over a little bit just to get through some more of these questions. How would you configure a connection to a host when you have an SSH tunnel through multiple other machines with various usernames, passwords, and keys? I have only dealt with single bastions in the past, so you kind of have me there. There is a Stack Overflow question that deals with that. I'll paste it in the live chat and pop over to it here. You can look at it for some suggestions. But basically, if you can connect through with SSH, you should be able to get through with Ansible, but it's just a matter of getting all the right settings and the flags and all that stuff. One bastion is easy enough. When you have 2 or 3 or 4, it starts getting more complicated, and you just have to sit there and work on it until you get it to connect. Block and rescue, yeah. Thanks, Diraj, for mentioning that. Rescue, block, rescue always is how it is in Ansible. All right, let's see. What other questions do we have? Guru Data says, how do you append values to specific files? For example, revision, IP address, host name, and a specific file for multiple hosts. This one is just basic templating. Let me go over to my, I have a appropriately named playbook here. This playbook is going to touch a file with the host name appended to it. And in anything that you do, like if you're templating a file, you can use any variable inside of it just like this. This is just Jinja. And if I run this playbook over in my terminal, what is it? Ansible playbook. There we go. If I run that playbook, it's going to create that file right here. And the file has that appended to it. It's very small and you might not be able to see that, but it's test-127001. So you can use any variable to template a file name like that. And sometimes you do something like that. If you're using Ansistrano or Capistrano style deployment, you would have a folder with the name of the commit hash in it or something, and then you'd switch the web server to serve from that folder instead of the other one. So that's something you can do. Pretty simple and easy. All right, what's next? Eddie asks, oh, where's my mouse? There it is. How do you display and parse output properly when the debug module is enabled? So we've covered debugging. I forget what episodes it was in, but I do have a playbook up here that it's just going to throw out a couple things in a variable. And I wanted to mention, let's see, playbook, what is this one? Eddie. So by default, Ansible outputs kind of this like mishmash of JSON and Ansible-ish output with these asterisks and things. There's a lot of different ways you can get your output in Ansible. So this is the default standard out callback. And you can get the full list of different standard out plugins or callback plugins up here. And so I'm going to show you a couple different ones. So there's minimal, which just gives you like the output. So that trims out some of this extra garbage if you don't need it. And there's also my favorite one, which is the YAML one, which is, I think, designed a little bit more for human readability. And you can also copy and paste this out, and it's valid YAML that you can use. So there's different options there. Other than that, I won't get too deep into debugging, except to mention that there is a playbook debugger built into Ansible that you may not have seen before. And I don't really use it that much, but it's nice to have for the few times that you do need to use it. But the playbook debugger can let you dig around in a playbook when you're running it and figure things out. I'll put a link to this in the live chat as well. Let's see, pop it in there. All right. So that's that question. Let's see, what else do we have? You previously stated you were predominantly PHP and still are. How did you pivot into Python, Ansible, Kubernetes, etc.? I'd say I didn't start out thinking like I want to be a PHP developer. I started out thinking I have people who are trying to have me build them websites, and I need to build them, and I need these certain features. And at the time, Drupal was the best system I found to do that. It was for sharing media, doing podcasting, video episodes, things like that, and sharing all that, and having it be able to be managed by multiple content editors. So Drupal at the time, this was 2005 or 6 or something. It was a pretty good system for that, and it was built in PHP. So I learned the tool, and then I started digging into how to modify it. I figured it out, it was all PHP, so I started learning PHP. That's the way it was. And then as time went on, I needed to start automating things. So I was like, oh, I need to, because you went from one server to multiple servers. So I started learning Bash and scripting because that was the easiest way at the time. There were some other tools, but they required me to learn Ruby, and it didn't really jive with my learning style, the way that Chef was built when I first looked at it. Then I found Ansible. I was like, oh, this is like shell scripting, which I already kind of know and is universal, and it's YAML, and YAML seemed pretty simple to me too. So I picked it up and started going. So it's more, I learn a tool that helps me achieve a goal, and then I start learning the language that's behind that tool, because once you start learning the tool enough, you start needing to get into it more and dig into the internals and submit patches and things. So that's kind of my pivot. And for Kubernetes, I have some servers and some services that went from 5 to 10 servers to like, I think Hosted Solar's up to like 80 or 90 servers. And so you start having problems that you deal with in a fleet of servers that something like Kubernetes can solve. So you start using the tool, and then once you learn the tool, you start learning, oh, if I want to modify this, I need to know a little Go. So it's, I mean, that's how my career is. I'm a practical person. I don't even have a computer science degree. I have a degree in philosophy. So I guess logic, you could say. Logic is helpful, but other than that, most of the philosophy, I'm not really thinking too much about Aristotle when I'm programming in Python. But I don't know. I'm a self-starter. I try to learn on my own and figure things out to solve problems. Also, will you be doing an Ansible for Kubernetes series? I'll talk about that soon. Let's see. Carlos asks, let me get my mouse back. What's the best way to get started with contributing to Ansible's codebase? And like I said, that's something early on in my Ansible journey, I didn't do much of that. And now I do some more of it. I still don't do a ton. And I don't do a whole lot of Python work. It's mostly documentation fixes and things that I do. But if you want to get started with that, check out the Ansible community guide, which is right here. Formal logic does help with programming. I mean, programming is just basically saying, like, you're a computer, compute things. So your brain has to put things together the right way. Although in our society, a lot of people just don't have a lot of logic anymore. Anyways, the community guide, there's a link here for are there easy ways to contribute? And this is where you can get into how to figure out where you can help. There's a lot of different things you can do in Ansible, just like in open source. There's so many different ways you can contribute and be useful and helpful. And you know, some of it is just being an advocate. Some of it is when you file an issue on GitHub, just following the template and doing it the right way instead of deleting the template and putting in, this is broken. Like, that's not helpful. Steps to reproduce, that kind of thing. And then, of course, there's things like submitting code and fixes and patches and new modules to collections, that kind of stuff. So anyway, check that out. And that's really the best. This is the best guide for it. Let's see, what else do we have? Alex asks, can you install AWX or Tower on a Raspberry Pi 4? That is a very good question. As you know, I've been mentioning it throughout the series. I have Raspberry Pi 4. I have this Turing Pi cluster. I have all kinds of different Raspberry Pi things and single board computers. So I'm always interested in running things on them. And the big limitation in the past has been these, most Pis, like this is a Compute Module 3, they have 1 gig of RAM or even less for the older ones. And AWX just doesn't run on it. So it hasn't been a big priority for anyone to even try it out because it's not fun to try it with 1 gig of RAM. The new Pis, the Pi 4 now has 8 gigs of RAM, which is plenty to run AWX. And even the 4 gig model should be able to run it okay. The other thing was that there were 64-bit operating systems, but it wasn't the official one for the Pi itself. So there wasn't a lot of effort that went that way. Somebody tried a couple years ago to get it working, and they got close, but found out a few issues with getting it running on ARM64 and stuff. So the thing is, though, that now almost everything is in place for it, and it might just need a few small tweaks to get it to run. And there's an issue set up by Kevin Durbin, which is here. I'll link to it if you want to follow it and see the progress. But it looks like we'll be close to getting AWX running on a Raspberry Pi soon. He has a fork that has some work in it towards that front. So it'll be cool. The other thing that I think is cool about that is Apple is going to be moving their Macs to using Apple Silicon, which is based on ARM64. And yes, so I did a video, Apple Silicon Raspberry Pi. I did a video and a blog post on this. What does Apple Silicon mean for the Raspberry Pi? And everybody's like, oh, you can't run Mac OS on a Raspberry Pi. And I'm like, that's not the point. The point is that if Apple uses ARM64 or the 64-bit ARM architecture, people like me will start more seriously thinking about moving all their work so that it works on x86 and ARM64. And even if, I'm not talking about software like Tweetbot. Tweetbot's probably not going to be built for Raspberry Pi because that's a user interface software, but everything else, all the Docker images and software libraries and things, if we can get them cross-compiled, you could install it on a Raspberry Pi. So it'd be cool if AWX works on Raspberry Pi, because then it also would work out of the box natively on the new Macs that come out with Apple Silicon. So that'll be fun. Let's see what else. We have a few more questions. Sorry if you're up late, if you're in Australia or something, but hopefully this is fun and exciting for you and worth staying up late and losing a couple hours of sleep. Let's see. Bruno asks, how do you integrate Ansible into GitLab CI/CD? Are there any best practices or practical experiences to keep separate dev, test, prod? Oh, a lot of different questions about this, but there's a lot to talk about there. I have used Ansible with GitLab a lot in the past. Like I mentioned, I have those images that I can use to run Ansible inside of CI and CD pipelines and CI jobs. And it's interesting. I actually built a pretty big static site hosting system that ran in Kubernetes, and GitLab controlled all of the deployments. And what I did was I kind of had a hybrid, a Docker file that would build an image that would use Ansible inside the image to do a few things. And then that image would be deployed for each of these different static sites. It had thousands of static sites in it. So yeah, you can do it. It's a little bit out of the scope of this discussion to talk about exactly how that would work. But for anything important, I do have a separate dev, test, and prod environment. Even for simple things, I always have a local environment or a local NCI environment that I can run to do testing and development. And then there's production. I almost never do any work in production, only for the most unimportant private things like my pydramble.com. Sometimes I'll do some work on the little Raspberry Pi there just because I don't want to spend the 10 minutes to set up my local environment. Not a great idea for anything that earns revenue, but I only get about 40 visitors a day to pydramble.com. Let's see. Oh, Jeremy's in a telecom closet fixing an issue. Always fun to be stuck in a closet. Hopefully it's at least air conditioned in there. I know my dad, who's a radio engineer, is currently working for a small, kind of more startup-y focused radio setup that has a lot of remote tower sites. And so he's going on these tower sites, and every day he comes back with a story of, well, I had to chase off a turkey and it started hitting my car. Or another day there was a snake at the door and it wouldn't move. And another day I opened the door, and when I opened it, there were like 30 rats inside. So it's like air conditioning, what's that? And this is in the Midwest where it's getting hot and humid too. So always fun to deal with actual in the field stuff like that. All right, let's see. Srinath asks, when should you use block and what are some use cases for it? I mentioned earlier, I don't have it open there, so let's open it back up here. Whoops. Oh boy. There we go. Let me open this back up. I use it sparingly, but I do use it block. And it's usually when I have some tasks that I want to run. Instead of putting these three things, like I could have the tasks and just put these in line on every task, but that's a lot of wasted space. So instead I use a block and I put the conditionals on that block. So that's when I do that. And like I said, I don't often use the block rescue always. No, yeah, block rescue always. I don't always use that syntax. I've used it a couple times here and there, but anyway, so yeah, there you go. Let's see. So that was block. Razvan asks, how do you build your own Ansible module? I'm not covering modules in Ansible 101 mostly because I think you can be really productive with Ansible. Like I said, I didn't even write any Python. I've done a couple little toy scripts and things for like Raspberry Pi before, but I didn't do a whole lot of Python until maybe 2017 or so, because I used Ansible for 4 years without barely knowing Python except for the basics to put together a script and how variables and things work. And I never wrote an Ansible module until 2017. And the first Ansible module I wrote was, I think, to build a tone generator so that when I sent tasks to my Raspberry Pi, it would play different tones for a video that I made on Close Encounters of the Ansible Kind. You can look that up on YouTube. It was just a really dumb thing, but it worked, and that was my first Ansible module that I ever wrote. So anyway, there is an introduction in episode 13 to building a test plugin, so you can go check that out. It's a couple episodes ago, and look at the index to find where that specific part is. And writing an Ansible module is a similar process. It's just getting the right formatting and code, and Ansible's documentation has some good guides on that. I think, yeah, so we're back at Matthias. I think that's all the questions. Like I said, there were a couple others. I'm sorry if I didn't get to you, unfortunately. There were just a few, and like I said, I tried to get it so I could fit it in an hour. Obviously, I went over that by a little bit. But let me get over back to, where is it, screen share, so that I can show the rest of today's thing, so I'm not forgetting anything and I'm in the wrong thing here. There we go. All right, so we talked about that. We did the retrospective. And let's see, the winner of, so earlier in the live stream series, I mentioned that I would be giving away this copy of the book, which has the first ever version of chapter 12, which actually has been updated since then. So this is like a vintage chapter 12 copy. And it has all my chicken scratch in it. All my notes for the previous episodes you can see here. Whoops, a little bit of that. And it has a chapter 7 rewritten as well. So a lot of different things in here. A fun special book, but it's version 1.20, so it's ancient history at this point. But I will send you this book, and I will send links to download free copies of both of this book and the Ansible for Kubernetes on LeanPub, so you get free updates. But I will sign this and send it off. And the person who is winning that, if you are still on the stream and can hear me, is F-R-A-I-Y-E-D, Fryed. And the way that I selected this was I figured to make it something slightly fair, I guess, but also to thank the people who have participated in the live chat. I picked the person who had chatted the last message before I got into this segment. So if you can hear me, F-R-A-Y, I can't say it or spell it. I can't even speak today. Anyway, you get this book. What I'd like you to do is find me on Twitter or wherever, send me a message. My email's on my website on the About page. Send me your address and I'll get it in the mail to you. So congratulations and thanks for watching. The last thing I wanted to talk about is what is next. So obviously I am doing this streaming series on the Turing Pi cluster, and my immediate goal is to finish the streaming series. I initially was going to do one episode, maybe a 20 or 30 minute long episode talking about this, and it turned into, I'm in like my month number 2.5 of working on different content for this and exploring Raspberry Pi compute modules and things. So I'm going to finish that up. I need to take a little break because when I started doing this streaming series, it was at the beginning of the COVID issue, and everybody was on lockdown, and I was actually doing 2 live streams every week, which was definitely burnout territory. And I need to take a little time off. After that, though, I am planning on doing something with Kubernetes, and I haven't yet decided exactly what, but it will either be a Kubernetes 101 type series, just like I've done with Ansible 101, or it'll be Ansible and Kubernetes, like automating Kubernetes. And that would be slightly more than 101, but it would still start off in a similar fashion where it's like, I've never used Kubernetes before, and by the end of it, you should be at least familiar with the concepts and how to get productive. So let's see. So there's plenty of other things in live chat that I have not been able to get to today. I saw some other good questions in there as well that I will try to get to. I'm probably going to post these questions and answers to a blog post, so check my blog at jeffgeerling.com. Please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel if you're interested in Kubernetes, Ansible, Raspberry Pi, computer stuff. Another thing that I just got in the mail a couple days ago is this fun little, I didn't get the tripod in the mail, but this is the Raspberry Pi camera, high quality camera. And I know that it's a little bit awkward because of the cabling and stuff, but I'm working on some mounts for it, and I'm working on some different applications for it, like astrophotography and time lapses, things like that. And so far, I'm actually very pleased with it. I even have, I have my telescope mount adapter, and I have an adapter for my Nikon F lenses. And it's pretty fun seeing my giant 70-200 lens stuck on this itty bitty thing with a Raspberry Pi hanging off the back of it. So I'm going to be doing some video content and blog posts on that probably pretty soon too. I've been pretty impressed with my initial tests for it. So anyway, please subscribe. Please consider supporting me on GitHub or Patreon. There's the GitHub is over here. There you go. It's hard to point on a screen that's backwards. And there's Patreon. And I don't know why I put Twitter on there, I guess to make it nice and balanced. Anyway, follow me there. I will be posting more about what I'm going to be doing next on the YouTube channel. And again, thank you so much for everybody who participated in the live chat and made the streaming series successful and helped to educate people with me about what Ansible is good at and how to use it and all that. So I guess that is, oh no, hello? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Are you still there? That was weird. My computer just like logged me out and logged me back in. So I have no idea if this is still working hopefully it still is. I guess that's my computer's way of saying, hey, it's time to go. It does look like it was still working. So anyway, thank you very much, and I will see you next time. And as I end my other videos, and people always like to comment on this, until next time, I'm Jeff Geerling, but I will be Jeff Geerling next time as well. So thank you.